Thank you, friend, for joining us this morning as we continue studying questions that are ones that relate to Bible subjects. And today we're discussing a question that is of significance to us. If you're a child of God, if you're a Christian, then this question should be of interest to you. And that question is Sunday the Christian Sabbath? Now, as we look in the Scriptures, the Bible does speak of the Sabbath. And when we think about the Sabbath, we think about the fact that under the law, when Moses gave the Ten Commandments, that the fourth of the commandment was this: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And it was a day of rest. It was something that God commanded, that there was to be no servile work that was done on that day. They couldn't cook. They couldn't be ones that plowed in their field. They were ones that were to observe that day and rest on that day. It wasn't confined solely for them and intended for them. Their animals were not either. God cared for the animals just as much as he cares, well, not just as much, but he cares for animals just as he cares for man. We look at that and we see in the book of Matthew that Jesus talks about that. Think about the birds of the heaven. They don't sow, they don't reap yet, they don't gather into barns, and God provides for them. And under the law, God provided for the animals as well. He commanded the Israelites that when they plowed, when they reaped, they were not to muzzle the ox when it's ready to let him eat. And when it came to the Sabbath, don't work him just like you worked him every other day. Leave him be. And so there was a day of rest for both those that were animals and man. And Jesus spake about the Sabbath, and he said, man wasn't made for the Sabbath was made for man. But the Sabbath law was that was a part of the law. And the Bible teaches that the law, though it was something that was good and something that blessed man, still, nevertheless, the law was removed. In the book of Romans, the Bible teaches us in the 7th chapter, we're made dead to the law by the body of Christ, that we should be joined to another. The book of Jeremiah talks about the fact that God was making a new covenant with the house of Israel, not like the old one, for there were deficiencies in the old one. And the deficiencies was that it could not permanently forgive sin. And since the law was removed, the commandment concerning the Sabbath also was removed. We find that the Sabbath was removed. And we're not to be keeping the Sabbath, that is the Saturday and the seventh day. When the book of Colossians was written, Paul said, in regard to the Sabbath, let no man judge you, therefore, in respect or drink or meat, for nor yet the matter of the Sabbath day. The Sabbath was removed. But we live under the new law. And is Sunday the new law? Is it that is the new covenant? Yes. Well, has God given us a Sabbath in this new law? Well, yes, he gives us a promise of a Sabbath. But Sunday, my friends, is not that Sabbath. Under the Old Testament, that was written for our learning, that we might benefit from it, there is another figure of a rest for God's people. It is that is seen in the covenant that God made with Abraham. Abraham was a man of faith. God called him out of Ur of Chaldees, said, come to a land I will show you. He was married, but he had no family. And he left that land of Ur, went to Haran, stayed there till his father died, and then he went to a land he did not know anything. God kept him in that strange land. And he promised to him, I'm going to, in your seed, bless all the nations of the earth. Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan for a long while and became discouraged because God had not given him any children, and he had no land and no place to call his home. And he said to God, what are you going to do for me? I don't have any children. And God let him out. And God said, look at the stars. Abraham, could he count the stars? And of course he could not. And God said, Abraham, that's the way your children are going to be. They're going to be ones that are innumerable, your descendants. As far as the land, God said, Abraham, look every direction. In every direction he looked, God said, whatever you look and see, I'm going to give it to you. And thus was given what was called the Promised Land. It was the land of Israel. Abraham did have children. He had the son, that was the promised son, Isaac. And from Isaac came the Jew today. And Isaac's son, Jacob, was one that had many sons. He had 12 sons. And at length, Jacob and his 12 sons went into Egypt, where they were blessed and prospered for a long while. But the years changed that situation, and they became slaves there. God sent them a deliverer, and that deliverer was Moses. And as Moses was in the land of Egypt with them, God gave him signs and miracles to prove to the people that he was their deliverer. And they did accept him, and they followed him out. God led them in victory over the Egyptians out of the land of Egypt, laying the hand with those that were the firstborn dead, because they had been ones that had not kept the Passover that God had commanded, to take the lamb, to put the blood upon the lintels and the doorpost. And when the angel of death passed through that night, those that were firstborn in that house, if there was no blood, they died. So the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea by a miracle, and God gave them the law on the mount called Sinai. And then they wandered for some period of time as far as that land was concerned. And as they wandered, God, through Moses, led them to the land of Israel, and they could go in and conquer it. And God's intention was that they should do so. But they said, let's send some spies into that country. Let's see what the danger of it is, what the land looks like. And so they did. They chose a man from every tribe, and these men went, and for 40 days they went through the length and the breadth of the land of Canaan. They came back, and they told the nation, it's just exactly what God said it is. It's a land that flows with milk and honey. But 10 of them didn't have faith in God. They said, we can't take it. It's got spies there. It's got giants there. We can't take it. But there were 2 that said, well, we can, sure we can. And these were Joshua and Caleb, and they said, God has led us this far. He's blessed us. He will bless us there. That has been his promise. But the people of Israel believed the report of the 10 spies. And he said, no, can't take it. And God became very angry with his nation. And he said to them, you're not going to go over into that land. You're not going to go. Rather, those of you that left the land of Egypt, that were ones that were old enough to be numbered in that census that counted the people of Israel, those of you that were old enough will die in this wilderness. You will not reach the land of Canaan because you didn't believe my word. And of the number of men that were in that first census, only 2 of them were ones that would be ones that would see that promised land. That is, that they would be ones that would receive their inheritance there. God said, the spies wandered for 40 days. I'm going to give you a year for a day. You're going to wander in this wilderness for 40 years. And after that, then, those that survive are ones that will enter in that land. But those of you that are adults are not going to enter in. The Hebrew writer talks about this. And as he talks about it in the 3rd chapter of the book of Hebrews, here is what the writer said. He said, take heed, brethren, lest haply there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief, in turning away from the living God. But exhort one another day by day, so long as it's called today, that not any one of you should be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we are become partakers with Christ if we hold fast the beginning of our confidence firm unto the end. What it said today, if you shall hear his voice, harden not your hearts. And he said, as in the day of provocation. And that was the day in which they said, Lord, we're not going to go over. We can't take it. In the day of provocation. And what happened in that day? The record says they heard and they provoked. And God swore to them in his wrath, you're not going to enter into my rest. And so, in the 4th chapter, the writer says, let us fear, therefore, lest haply a promise being left of entering into his rest, any one of you should seem to come short of it. For we've had promises given unto us as unto they, but it didn't profit them because it was not united by faith with them that heard. God said, I swear in my wrath, they're not going to enter in my rest. And that rest was, he was going to give them that promised land that he promised to Abraham, their father, many, many, many years before. He said to these that were adults that rejected the promise of God, you're not going to enter in. And as he continues, he said that for those that are God's people, remember, that there remains, therefore, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. So, as the people of Israel were ones that left the land of Egypt, and they were en route to the promised land, that promised land was a land that was their land of rest. The promise that God had given to Abraham, their fathers, they could have enjoyed and participated in, but they didn't believe. And just as there was that shadow, that figure of Canaan being a promised land for the Israelites, so there is for God's people today a promised land. And that promised land is heaven. Jesus promised to his faithful rest. Matthew the 10th chapter, he said, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. I am meek and lowly in heart. You shall find rest unto your soul. When John the Revelator wrote the last book, that's in the order of the New Testament, he said that God has blessed those and has said, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. Yea, says the Spirit, for they shall rest from their labors, and their work shall follow them. Jesus said to his disciples, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may also be. Of that day that Jesus speaks of, I'm going to come again. He speaks in Matthew, the 25th chapter. He shows the King as he comes, and he divides the great multitude of humanity into two groups, those on the left and those on the right. And to those on the right he will say, come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Then he says, I was hungry, you fed me, thirsty, and you gave me drink, naked, you clothed me, sick and in prison, you visited me. And then the writer says, these shall go away into everlasting life, but the wicked into eternal punishment. Eternal rest awaits the faithful child of God. The first day of the week, Sunday, is a special day. It is a day of assembly. It is a day of worship. It is a day of remembrance. Every child of God should remember the significance of it and keep that day as God has determined that he should. But it is not the Christian Sabbath. The Christian Sabbath is heaven. My friend, if you miss heaven, it would be better for you if you'd not been born. In our next lesson, we're going to discuss another subject we believe of interest, and that is, are all believers going to be saved? Thank you.